My name's Adarsh Ramchurn, founder of Ethnically, and today I'm interviewing Rio Gayle. Rio has been a producer at ITV and the BBC, and today I'm going to learn more about her journey, what makes her tick, and her advice for the future generations. Rio, thank you so much for joining me today. To start with, could you share a bit about your background and what's led you to being a producer today?
Yeah, I would say I just loved watching telly when I was younger. When I used to watch it with my mum, we would always talk about, they could have done their storyline a little bit better, all that stuff. So I was very much invested in storytelling from a young age as a consumer. And then when I got into school, I really enjoyed media. I enjoyed crafting those stories myself. So it just became very, very clear that I should try and pursue the producing route in my life.
Amazing, cool. And since then, you've worked on some really high-profile events like the Coronation, obviously in Good Morning Britain. What would you say is like a pivotal moment in your career that's really shaped who you are today and how's it shaped your approach to storytelling?
I would say through all the shows that I've worked on, I think it's important to tell a good story. And when I say a good story, to really just research it well and not tell a half-hearted story, and
Mm.
also a different angle of a story,
Yeah,
right?
that's so true.
I think it's important to, it's not just say another knife crime story or another, violence against women
Mm.
story. Um, I think the human story is so powerful. And I think for me, it's just important to kind of get those key parts of a story to kind of resonate with the audience,
Yeah.
I would say. Because I think sometimes, with some stories, you kind of switch off. It's like, oh, not another one of these. But
Mm.
it's like, actually, no, it's more than that. There's a person, there's a life behind that. So I think, for me, when I'm telling stories, it's important to just get that real grit and depth of a story and kind of get people to resonate with you on a human level, because we all have the same feelings. We all kind of yeah, we all kind of connect on the same thing. So that's my kind of, I guess, yeah, my goal when it comes to telling
Yeah,
stories.
I'll definitely like agree with that because I think with storytelling, I feel like me personally, I learn best through stories, and you learn
Hmm.
from people's stories. And I think if you can get that raw, authentic story out, I think that's that when I consume TV or any content is probably what speaks the most to me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really inspirational. Um, in terms of your cultural perspectives
Hmm.
and how like culture has influenced how you want to tell stories, how would you say that's impacted the way you tell stories, but also how you share them as well?
Yeah, I think it's always good to be authentic when you're telling stories. I think if you're going to tell a story about, for me, I'm from a Caribbean background, and, if we're going to tell a story, concerning, say, Windrush, or
Mm,
if I'm going to be part of a story, concerning a Jamaican person, maybe Usain Bolt's probably the most famous
mm.
Jamaican person
Yeah.
that we kind of know to date. It's important that, I can bring that to the story if I'm in that room, because I am someone from that cultural background. So, I think sometimes when we're telling cultural stories, if the people in that room telling the story aren't from that
Aren't
cultural
representative,
background,
yeah.
we often then get something that's quite mediocre, something that's quite stereotypical. And I think it's so important to be a voice in that room, to be like, okay, this is not what the culture is. So, for example, if we were to talk about the Caribbean and Jamaican culture in particular, there are things that come to mind like jerk chicken
Mhm.
or whatever, but it might be actually a shock to people that jerk chicken's not our actual national dish. It's something called saltfish and ackee saltfish, sorry. Jamaicans don't get hard meat. But
Yeah.
it's just
Mm,
telling something a bit more in depth. So it's being the authentic story, or the person in the room to tell the authentic story and to speak up. I think that's
mm.
the importance of being a diverse and a different voice, and not being afraid to actually speak up and say, actually, I like how we're telling the story, but I think we can tell it better in this way. So
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like when you talk about representation, a lot of people are like, "Oh, what is representation?" But it's yeah, like you said, having those people in the room that are being able to impact what's the decisions being made and getting people's voices heard. And that's a lot of what I want to try and do with my work. But it's really good to know that that's something that you push as well.
yeah.
Um,
I would like to say on that as well. I think it's exactly what you said, because I think some people think it's just being in the room, but I think it's
yeah.
also not just being in the room, it's having a mark on what's being told. It's not just because we have, Rio in the room, oh, that's the tick box. No, what
Mm,
is Rio adding to the story, because that's diversity. It's a diversity of perspective, right? And I think sometimes we have gotten that wrong. Just having someone in the room, it's like, actually, how are they adding to the story? How are they changing the story? How are they, enhancing the story in with their unique perspective? So I would say that's like true diversity, and that's true, like, allowing all different cultural backgrounds to be involved.
No, I completely agree with that. I think, I think, like we said, diversity and representation in all industries is what we need to push for. Kind of a bit more about sort of the early influences on your career. I know we touched on your journey, but whether personal or professional, who would you say has really impacted who you are today and where you are today?
Yeah, I would say, do you know what? I would say my mum. And I think it's from a weird stance, in the sense of, I mentioned we were from a working class background. And I think it was the fact that my mum hadn't done what she wanted to do. She wanted to pursue many different dreams, but, unfortunately wasn't able to. And I always thought, you know what, I don't want to live my life not knowing that I hadn't done what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And just had a good go at it. Like I mentioned at first, I was very much discouraged from being a producer. And I thought, you know what, okay, I could take that advice and, go and do something else. But actually, I'm young. What's stopping me?
Yeah.
If I don't succeed, at least I know I did it without trying, with trying, sorry, And I think that's a really important thing. So I would say my mum, because, she kind of just taught me, actually, go for what you
Go for what you want.
You don't want to live a life of regret. You want to live a life knowing that you've lived it fully.
No, that's amazing. I think moms are always sort of the ones that are going to push you, and I feel like they have a really like empathetic way of sharing how they want the best for you.
Yeah.
So I can definitely resonate with that from sort of my own mum point of view. But I think I feel like when we ask about role models, a lot of people think of like the celebrity or the big person in the industry, but I think it's really important to like mention your family and parents and the ones that really have sort of provided the foundations for everyone.
Absolutely. And they have the biggest impact on you,
Yeah.
And, some people it's not the case, but, and, I'm not knocking anyone that does have a celebrity or whatever, but I think it is, for me, that was definitely the biggest impact. And she was always encouraging to me, like I said, a teacher was not encouraging to me, but she was like, you know what, Ria, just try, just go, and I'll support you. I'm not able to really help you otherwise, but I can just encourage you and just, teach you to pursue whatever it is that you have in your heart, which is, that's great.
No, 100%. It's amazing to hear about the story around your mum and the impact that she's had, and I can definitely sort of relate to that. I think relating to my next question around obviously having someone there to support you, was there a time in your career where you were going through a particular challenge or something difficult and you were able to sort of lean on the support of your mum, for example, or those around you?
Yeah, I definitely, my mum for sure. But I also think when you're, doing your career journey, it's great to have a group of friends who are either, people in your industry. That could be people who you work with. Obviously, people have kind of mixed views of whether you should be making friends in work. For me, that has been a very massive help. Obviously, it's having a bit of wisdom, knowing who to confide in, who not to confide in. But I think having people in the same industry who understand what you're talking about, because there might be just like certain work cultures in a certain industry that maybe people outside don't understand. And it's just nice not having to over explain that with someone who is in the industry. So I would say definitely having friendships in my industry and just kind of, speaking to them about how sometimes difficult things are. I would say also having mentors is great as well. I know it's not as easy sometimes to get mentors, but I've been really fortunate in my career to have mentors at certain points of my career. And, them just being someone who is older, someone who's actually maybe walked that path before, they can direct me. And they also, if you're having a difficult time in your career, sometimes there's a lot of emotions.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's nice to have someone who has that wisdom, who doesn't have all the emotions invested, to be like, actually, you need to look at it in a way of X, Y, and Z. And that's been really helpful. So definitely, I would say having a group of friends, and also having a mentor if you can get hold of one.
No, that's really important. I think, yeah, mentorship, the power of mentorship is so important, especially I can speak to someone who's early on in my career, but I think whatever stage in your career, it's always important to have a mentor.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think friends in the industry as well, like those that can, like you said, lean on to support you when you're going through tough times, but also, I guess, celebrate you when you're doing something really amazing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's really fantastic to hear. A couple of questions around like why you do what you do. That's one of the themes of Ethnically. We kind of speak to role models from all industries, understand why they do what they do and how they got to where they got to. That's kind of like a little motto that we have. But in terms of why you do what you do, what drives your passion for creating stories and impacting stories? But also, what would you say is the main problem that you aim to solve through the stories that you're telling and sharing as a producer?
I would say my main drive is just a story being told in the most authentic way, in the best way. And I kind of mentioned earlier when I was younger, I think we've come a long way, to be honest, in terms of storytelling, in terms of especially like kind of, news items per se. Like, what I do, I kind of have a journalistic kind of current affairs background, and especially stories around Black stories and, knife crime and, this idea of like Black on Black crime. I think for me, yes, okay, especially with that particular story, there is an issue with obviously Black males killing one another. However, it's not Black on Black crime. It's a poverty story.
Yeah.
It's a lack of resources story. It's way bigger than just Black boys killing each other for the sake of killing each other. And I don't like that narrative. I don't like narratives that are lazy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really annoys me. I think, especially with something like media, it's so powerful. And people get a lot of their ideas about other people they may not know about media from media. And I think it's important when we're telling a story to tell it well and to tell the whole part of the story. So yeah, I think that is the thing that has really kind of, pushed me, and being a voice in these rooms that, I'm able to have an impact on the stories that we're telling.
I think there is a lot of stereotypes that are generated from the media, and that's not something new. I feel like that's been around for a long time, but
Yeah.
I could, yeah, completely echo that. And I think what sometimes, yeah, it is lazy media in terms of just trying to. Actually, this might be a question. Do you feel like media companies sometimes have lazy, like do it on purpose, or is it something that is, what would you say?
I don't. I think being in the room, I don't think it's necessarily on their part. Sometimes it being I think it's again a lack of people in the room.
Yeah.
So also the people, like I said, certain industries, my industry, the TV industry, it's doing a lot of work to change. But there is a certain type of person that enters into this industry because it's not accessible to someone from a working class background, because a lot of it in entry level routes, you're going to have to work, for low pay. We don't encourage working for free per se, but a lot of it is unstable unless you're going into something like being a doctor. There's a clear path, you've got a nice kind of wage to help you through it. And obviously we all know that doctors should be getting more, but at least there's something there to kind of help you live. And, in my industry, that is just not guaranteed. So the kind of person that's going to attract is someone who can make that, that decision to, to do that. So I wouldn't say necessarily it is a case of, it's lazy. I think it's just a case of not very much knowing this group of people. And they kind of, if it's a news story, there's very limited time as well in terms of how well you can tell a story as well. So it's also quick. How quick can we tell the story? How much time do we have? So I think there is a lot of factors. I wouldn't necessarily say it's lazy per se, but it's important that, people like myself who are in these rooms who speak up and say, actually, I think we could be telling the story in a different way.
No, 100%. I guess that is the responsibility of a lot of media professionals, particularly those senior voices, but also probably more grassroots organizations as well that are kind of helping to shape and challenge that narrative. Would you say that's something that's changing in the industry? And like you kind of mentioned and alluded to it, that we're getting more voices in the room, but how would you say it's changed over the sort of last 10, 20 years in terms of getting more people in the room to influence the stories that are told, the narratives that are shared, the way that media is consumed?
Yeah, I think it is definitely changing to 100%. It's changing on so many levels. I think it's changing on, bigger levels and just knowing that we need diversity in a room. And I think the word diversity is a bit of sometimes a dirty word in the sense of it's just one of those words that sometimes we say, but we don't really understand it.
Yeah.
I think, at its level or at the kind of basis of what a diverse room is, it's just having different voices speak up, not just the same voices speak up or the same voices impact a story. And, diversity is known to kind of increase any business in
Yeah.
any sectors, you know, income, revenue. It's a good thing. You want diversity in your work team because you then have a lot more to pull from. It's a good thing instead of having one pool of people, making an impact. It's greater to have so many more people and so many more voices that you can pull from. Our society doesn't look one way, especially living in the UK
Yeah.
and in London.
In London, yeah.
We look around us and there's so many different people, so why not tap into that? So I think there's that understanding of that, and then also I think it's changed in the sense of access to camera phones, social media. Everyone has a voice now, so we're not having to wait for bigger companies to tell the story. You can get on your phone and tell your story yourself and get sometimes more views than some of these bigger companies. So I think there's so much happening around this space, and I think if you can't do it through a bigger platform, you can do it yourself and you can have just as much of an impact. So I think that's great.
That is one of the things that I definitely love about today in terms of the current generation,
Yeah.
particularly just empowering and taking the initiative to create content or tell a story in their own way. And it is, and I feel like maybe in terms of some of the big media companies, they are actually looking at some of these young producers, content creators, or those that are challenging the narrative to really they're actually taking a bit aback about how well they're doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're right. That's something that's really helped in a way kind of break down barriers and reduce the barriers to entry in probably an industry like the media industry, where people can take it themselves to create that content and get their voice heard, I guess. But yeah, no, I think it is something that at least I can definitely say from the outside looking in, there is change from my perspective because I can see the work being done. What would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your work?
By far, people. I love people. I love meeting different people. The different stories that you get to hear from the people. I've worked on a wide range of TV programs, and the benefit is just meeting so many different people. Yeah, I love a good story, and yeah, I just feel really fortunate that I get to meet some really, really interesting people, whether that is, from the celebrity realm, but I would say more of the kind of people stories where it's like, people have gone through really hard times and yet they've decided to use those hard times to kind of speak up and tell their story and, make a change. So I feel really fortunate about the different types of people that I get to meet. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. I feel like people make people do make the world go round,
Yeah,
but I feel like
do.
without people, you can't really have a story as well. And I feel like,
Yeah.
the people that you work with really change and make you feel a certain way around your work. And yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful answer.
And I think as well, just going into just people, like I was just speaking to a friend, like you can have the best job ever, but if you're working with a terrible team, it will really
impacts you, yeah.
It really impacts you, So people are so important to, what you do, whatever industry you are in, I'd say.
No, 100%. Could you describe a time where you faced a significant challenge in your career and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so I would say you're always going to have difficulties in your career. I think that's something that people don't really talk about when it comes to careers. Actually, when you're in school, it's like, what's your dream job? And you don't really think about hurdles that you might face, but your hurdles that you might face are maybe difficult people or feeling that you want to kind of go in a certain direction but you feel like you can't overcome a certain hurdle. And I feel like when I've had those encounters or those struggles, I found that having great people around me on the level of friendships, people who are in the industry themselves and that can give advice so they understand what hurdles I'm facing, or having a mentor who's able to kind of, give their wisdom because they've already walked that path. It's been so good for me. And they're able to kind of come at it from a kind of more not so emotionally invested level and kind of just be like, actually, here's a strategy to
Yeah.
how you actually overcome this. Because, you know, with any challenge, it's having the right strategy to get out, right? So that's how I feel like I've overcome those situations and struggles.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rio, for being part of this interview. I've got one final question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who's trying to break into the media industry? I know we touched on skills, but if you had to give one golden nugget, what would that be?
Do you know what? I would say look for a scheme. And I know schemes at the moment do not exist in the same way that when I was coming into the industry, I think there are a little less kind of schemes, but I'm seeing a lot of kind of digital schemes
Yeah.
around. So just to give some golden nuggets that are actually tangible, there's a website called Creative Access. I don't know if you've heard of that website, but it gives basically people who want to get into, creative industries like myself, they give people a starting chance. So it's industries like, the media industry or publishing as such. So that's one tangible way. I would say also another way is, I would say, like I kind of said earlier, if you see a piece of work that you like, email the person and ask if there's any jobs. I think unfortunately for my industry, a lot of jobs aren't advertised, but actually you get a job through just speaking to
Speaking
someone
to someone, yeah.
and finding out actually what's there. So send so many emails, DM people on LinkedIn. You never know what it's going to get you. It can land you a job.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, yeah, that's a really nice way to sort of end the interview around reaching out to people, getting your voice heard, and yeah, just trying to activate the industry and try and get your, or I don't know what, but no, yeah, I think that advice is really important. I think understanding that you can, if you want something, just go and get it. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I've got personally, but I hope everyone watching this video has taken away as well.
Yeah.